Hi there and welcome to Stirling Distillery. While she gets settled in, we'll just go for a chat with June upstairs, or as I like to call her, Mum.
Hi there, I'm June, co-founder of Stirling Distillery. Thank you very much for joining us today, or this evening. We're going to take you on our virtual tour and tasting and show you around our little distillery here in Stirling. This is the biggest tour we've ever hosted here at Stirling Distillery, so we hope you've got enough space out there to really enjoy it. By now you should have all received your lockdown kit, which includes your tonic, your gins, your liqueurs, a little cocktail book to play around with afterwards, and the little hand sanitizer. This is the one you do not drink. So let me just tell you briefly how Stirling Gin came about. Back in 2008, Cameron and I had a whisky shop with an art gallery and a gift shop. We were selling lots of whisky, and then gin started to really rise in sales. We were also running a successful Stirling Whisky Festival, so by 2014 we had launched our first Stirling Gin Festival, as there were so many new brands coming on the scene. It was after that Cameron came up with the idea, why don't we create Stirling Gin and have something local for us? So he went about this by buying a little still, which we called Ginty, which he spent about 6 months playing around with lots of different herbs and spices and botanicals in the kitchen at home, driving us as a family mad. Anyway, so at this point we still don't have a distillery to call home for Stirling Gin, so we had to get contract distilled for a few years while we waited on the right building becoming available. So we first viewed the building that we're sitting in today, which is the Old Smithy, back in 2017. However, with the sale of the building, then the renovation works, it took us until 2019, last June on the 22nd, that we finally opened our doors as a distillery and visitor centre here in Stirling. We're literally just down from the castle and couldn't be in a more historical spot in the city. We love the artwork of Richie Collins when we had the gallery, so when deciding on the brand for our gin and what we were going to have on our bottles, we very much wanted to have something that represented Stirling. So we went for the Wallace Monument and the old Stirling Bridge. And with Richie's paintings, very quirky old style buildings, he just fitted the bill. So we commissioned him to do our core range, and anyone who's looked at our bottles will appreciate the artwork that's gone into them. I think it's now time that we'll go downstairs and join Cameron and we can enjoy some gins. Then we will take you on your tour and you'll have some history of gin, a little bit educational. Then we'll go through and meet Laura, our distiller, and then we'll come back and finish off with our liqueurs. So if you want to follow me. Cameron, also co-founder of Stirling Distillery.
Hi guys, we're going to start the tasting now. We're going to start with our classic Stirling Gin, which we developed at home in 2015. Okay, let's start. We get some ice into the glasses. And piece of orange. We would have had basil, but coronavirus has taken fresh basil away. What we're going to do now is pour a measure of our 43% into a separate glass, and we'll tell you about it. The reason we put it in a separate glass is so you can taste it first, because it's like your dinner. You wouldn't just have salt, cover your dinner in salt first, not unless you're June's dad, who has salt with his dinner, not dinner with his salt. So when you smell Stirling Gin to start with, you get a right green, clean, fresh flavour. And if you want to have a wee sip, and taste it, you get a dryness of a London gin. Brutally honest, this is a selfish point. It's the gin I created because it's the way I like my gin. What we need is to put it in here, into your glass, and give it a swirl round and grab some tonic.
So we prefer the Mediterranean Fever Tree tonic as it doesn't disguise the flavour of the gin. Half a bottle of tonic to 1 measure of gin is more than adequate. Go.
Am I not getting any?
Sorry, darling. Go. Cheers.
Cheers. We've got orange and basil in our gin. The reason for that is I feel the garnish should mirror the botanicals rather than something that's not in your gin already. The garnish should enhance the flavour of your gin and tonic to give you extra enjoyment and more flavour. While you're enjoying your gin and tonic, I'll just tell you a bit about our battle strength gin. Our battle strength gin is at 55% and it's unique to us. And the reason it's at 55% is Robert the Bruce was in the Battle of Stirling Bridge and he actually passed away in his 55th year of life, and we thought it would be a good way to mark his place in Scottish folklore history and create a gin for him. It's exactly the same recipe as our standard 43% gin, and it drinks very much like a single malt whisky. You can sip it and it's a really nice one just to have with a bit of ice, a bit of basil and a bit of orange. What we'll do is just have a little, well, we'll just have a little taste because we're working, you're sitting at home enjoying yourselves. The things we do for work. We're just going to have a little taste of the battle strength gin. You, in your time, can have a full one. When you smell it, you get a much more intense alcohol flavour, but it's still got the characteristics of the 43% gin. When you taste it, you don't get the burn. It's just a smooth, warming feeling.
So it's a little bit more spicy on the tongue.
Slightly more spicy. For once I'll give you something, June.
Thank you.
It's not often you say something that's worth listening to.
Really?
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying your gin and tonics, and while you're enjoying your gin and tonics, I'll hand you over to Jade. Cheers.
Hi there, welcome to Stirling Distillery. So today I'll be your virtual tour guide. My name is Jade. Hopefully I'll get to take you through a bit of the history of gin today and our story, and then we'll move over to the still room where we'll speak to our distiller. So first of all, I take it you all like gin if you're watching this. I'm not sure how much you know about gin or if you just enjoy having a little drink of it, but I'll start off with the legal requirements. So in the UK there are only 2 legal requirements for what makes gin gin. Now the first one there is it must have a predominant taste or smell of this juniper here. So juniper berries have been around for a really long time and it's what we use to flavour our gin. So if something you think smells like gin, it probably smells like juniper. Then the other legal requirement is just the alcohol in there. So it helps to have alcohol in gin, of course. Now it must be at least 37.5% ABV to be legally considered a gin. Otherwise, if it's weaker than that, it's probably one of your liqueurs that you're getting. Our classic one sells at 43%. Now the juniper there has been used for a very long time by ancient cultures such as the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks. Now mostly it was used as medicine and it was preserved with alcohol. So that was the first time that juniper was ever being paired with alcohol. And this was mostly used for stomach ailments. Obviously over time we've figured out that a lot of these things didn't work out for them. It didn't really help them very much, but we do know that it's a proven diuretic and it's good for your liver. Obviously not in gin form though, the alcohol isn't great for your liver as you probably know there. So that's pretty much it for juniper. It was used during the plague as well, so during the Black Death, the plague doctors that had the big masks with the beaks on them, they believed in this sort of filtering system where they would stuff the beaks with herbs. Now at the time everyone was very superstitious, especially in Europe and really in Scotland as well. So that means that they thought that there were clouds of evil demons floating about in the air. They'd call these evil demons miasmas. And the miasmas they believed would possess them if they inhaled them. So if they inhaled a bad smell, they'd inhale a miasma, and they'd be possessed and probably made ill, and at this point in time with the plague, which was obviously a very, very bad thing that they wanted to keep away from. Now they thought if you used things like juniper, maybe thyme, lavender, rosemary, depending on what was growing in the area that you were living in, they could put those herbs into the beak and into their pockets and things like that. That's where you get your ring of roses coming from, and they would keep away the plague for them. Obviously that didn't work out very well for them, however. Now throughout time you get to the Dutch. So in about the 16th, 17th century they start making this drink called Genever. I'm not sure if any of you have come across it, however it's not very widely available nowadays. Mostly you're getting it in Holland in the airports or in specialist shops over there. Now I've had people on tours before that have tried it and they've not been a big fan of it. They usually describe it as a really strong whiskey flavoured with juniper. Not sure how that works out. If you like whiskey and you like gin, maybe it's worth a try. I've not tried it myself because I've not been over to Holland to go and try it, but there you go, maybe one worth putting on the sort of gin bucket list there. Now the Dutch refined this drink and they made it really popular. It was mostly just something that you would drink straight. It was just a juniper flavoured drink and that was all there was to it. But it's what we would call the ancestor of gin, I suppose. Now, it was a king called William of Orange. You've probably heard of him. He made it really famous over in this country. So when he took the throne over here in the late 1600s, he brought his favourite drink, his national drink, over with him. And with that, he's sharing it with all the nobles at all the banquets, and all of the really rich people are buying it in and importing it over. Now, with rising political tensions across Europe, it meant we had the Anglo-Dutch Wars, which happened over a few decades, and that's where you're getting your Dutch courage coming in. So Dutch courage is probably a very familiar term to you all. It's mostly used as a generic sort of thing for drinking alcohol, but it did actually start off with Genever. Now, Genever was drank by the Dutch before going into battle, and apparently somebody noticed that they were a lot braver than the English going into battle, so it became known as Dutch courage. Now, there's not really a date or time or a place or anything like that for when gin was invented. It sort of formed from this Genever, but nobody has a real sort of record for when that started off as gin. It was probably just a shortening of the word Genever to Genever to gin, and that's all there really is to it. Now, because of the political tensions in Europe, the import costs skyrocketed, and the king decided instead of importing it over, what we're going to do is we're just going to promote people making it here in this country, and mostly in London. Now, most people didn't drink water. It was full of disease and poisons and all sorts of horrible things, especially in London where you've got open sewer systems and running straight from the Thames and everything like that. So it was pretty grim stuff. Now, people have been drinking ale for thousands and thousands of years. It's always been something you would drink. Now, women and children, infants, they would usually drink, in Scotland anyway, something called small ale, which was about 2 or 3% ABV. For the men, they were a lot stronger stuff, which was about 5% ABV. And with that, the gin becomes really, really popular. People started making it in their bathtubs, and that's where your bathtub gin comes from. So instead of distilling it like we would now through a still, even though stills have been around for a very long time, it meant that people were just putting all these ingredients, chucking them all together into a big bathtub, and that was it. Now, people didn't bathe very often, going back to the miasmas, the clouds of evil demons floating about in the air. People believed that if you were to bathe, you open up your pores for the steam from the hot water, and the miasmas would be able to possess you that way. And obviously this is something that they wanted to avoid, so they didn't want to bath very often, usually just like once a month or so. So all the rest of the time they can make this gin in their bathtubs and sell it to people on the side to make more money for their families, to be able to afford supplies for them, usually just breads and ales, and then they'd drink some of the gin for themselves instead of water. Now, it became so popular to drink this gin that everyone was making it, so because everyone made it, it made it really cheap. And instead of drinking pints of beer, people were drinking pints of straight gin. Now at this point you didn't have your gin and tonics, it's not like drinking a pint of gin and tonic, it was just straight gin, and there was no way of really knowing how strong it was. And also because poorer people in society were making it, they were putting nasty things in there to trick people and make it cheaper for them to produce. So they started putting turpentine in there, which we would use for cleaning, and it's toxic, of course, but it produces chemically a similar taste and smell to juniper. So turpentine was probably one of the worst ones in there. The next one's a bit icky, but it's still not as toxic as turpentine. Now, it was urine. Again, because they don't have safe drinking water, they would use urine to dilute it, to cut it at the end of the process of making it. And then there also had methylated spirits in there. So you can see how this is going. People were going blind, people were dying, there was all sorts of like liver failures and organ failures, all of that. And people were also going sterile, so the birth rates dropped as well. Now the king noticed, obviously, this is a massive, massive problem for people and for society. So he decided to introduce a couple of different laws. Now, over time, some of these laws worked out, some of them didn't. One of them was a £50 annual tax on retailers. So anyone that wanted to sell gin, so usually just your corner shops where they want to sell it on the side, just for a little extra money, they were paying this £50, which in today's money is £20,000. So that's a lot of money for a little shopkeeper to be putting out there. And then with that, they also started to put pipe systems through the walls, and they were getting really, really sneaky. So they were putting black cat signs usually outside to signify that there were bottles of gin being sold there, or they would slot money through the cat's mouth, lift up the paw, and that's what happened. You would get a little spout with gin coming out of there, and they were just getting sneaky, so that didn't really work out. Okay, so obviously the gin caused a massive problem throughout society, and later on they decided to bring in an act that really did work out for them. They brought in the 1751 Gin Act, and that one stood out for a very, very long time. And this was when the £50 tax was put on to the producers rather than the retailers. So they put that tax on, but they also put in a minimum still size of 1800 litres. Now this is where gin declines in popularity, because the beer companies who had seen really low profits had actually brought in some propaganda called Gin Lane. Now Gin Lane, this image here, was by an artist called William Hogarth. And like I say, the ale companies commissioned it in favour of the 1751 Gin Act. And this is where you get your terms like mother's ruin coming from. These people are all meant to be savages. They're fighting on the streets, they're chewing bones like dogs, they're drinking gin and putting gin down babies' throats over here. And then you've got the whole idea that gin makes you depressed comes from the man hanging here, and the buildings are all falling down. So obviously a very, very bad image for gin, and it was to put people off, and it did work out for them. So most people stopped drinking gin, and then they also had another image called Beer Street, where there was all these happy jolly men drinking beer, and they were all very well educated, and you can see that in the imagery that they used. So people would keep away from gin and they would go towards the beer. And through colonialism, it also started out where women were made to drink the tea and then the men would drink the beers, and that was always promoted for them. So the whole 1751 Gin Act was brought about because the thought behind it was that if you could afford a still of at least 1800 litres, pay your tax for it, and pay the men to run it and buy everything in bulk, then you'd be from a good family, because at this point in time, you only had money if you were from a good family. And if your family name was on there, then it would mean that you weren't going to be putting things like turpentine and urine in there, because your family's reputation was on the line. So this is how it worked out really well for them. And you went from about 2,500 distilleries in London alone to only 4 put on the record. Now there probably were illegal ones, but there's no way of knowing how many. There could have been a couple, there could have been a couple hundred. There's no way of knowing this, unfortunately. So our still isn't quite as big as 1800 litres, but that's because later on they actually took away the Gin Act. But I'll get to that in a moment. Now, through colonialism, you start getting new botanicals coming in. So people started to buy gin again, but it was only the really wealthy that could afford it. So ones that taste like licks of fear. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that brand, but that's probably one of your best examples of it. And with all of these new things coming about, they also noticed that anyone that had fancier looking bottles were selling more gin. So Bombay Sapphire Blue Bottle, very, very, up there brand at the time, they come about and sort of got into this idea that pretty things sell better. So people started buying more collectible looking bottles. And then when you get to 1999, Hendrick's came about and they brought in the Perfect Serve. Now they were the first company to tell people how to drink their drink. And that's it. You know, that's where it all started. That's when people start telling people, this is how you put different garnishes into our gin. And their one was a bit strange, but it was a bit of a gamble on their part and it worked out really well for them. So hopefully you're familiar with the Hendrick's idea. Now it was cucumber put in your drink. The idea is you're drinking something with a cucumber in your drink and people say, well, what is it you're drinking there? That's a bit weird that you have a cucumber in your glass. Okay, right, I'll go to the bar and I'm going to go and buy one, and that's your first sales there. And Hendrick's are still about now because they were really successful taking on this whole different marketing strategy. And then when it comes to 2009, that was when the minimum still size was completely abolished. It was Sipsmith that petitioned the government to get rid of the minimum still size. So now there is no minimum still size at all. And that's where I take you over to our story. Okay, so with having slightly different flavours in there, we decided to go with something that was really local. Now we wanted something local because we wanted it something that makes it Stirling gin. And when Cameron and June were walking the dog one day, they sort of noticed the answer was all around them, something that we can go and forage ourselves. And that was the nettles, the wild nettles that grow absolutely everywhere in Scotland. And yes, these nettles can sting you, but you can use them to make things like tea and wine and soup, so why not use it to make gin? And that's where we experimented a bit more and we stuck with these 6 botanicals. So your juniper, your angelica root, your lemon peel, orange peel, your basil and your nettles. So we go out every year and we pick the nettles for ourselves. So that's a bit of a community project amongst everyone in the distillery, and obviously we have to wear really thick gloves to do that. And for a while they needed somewhere else to distill rather than the place that I'm standing in right now, and that's because they didn't have a premises. So they were distilling in Glasgow at one point and in Abermere at another point. And they bought this building over. I'm sorry that you can't be in the building today to experience it, but it is magnificent what they've done with the place. We wanted to keep all of the bare walls here. We wanted to keep the history of the building alive. Now, it was first built in 1888, funnily enough, as a church temperance hall. And it was to stop people drinking, so you'd be greeted by a priest, and it was part of the Allen Park parish. And you'd come up and they'd lead you on to a drink-free life, and that would be it. But now we're distilling gin here. So anyways, it was later used as a primary school. It had no toilet, no running water, no lighting, nothing like that. It never had any of this in here. And we have interviewed people that went to school here. It is available on our blog, on our website. So if you want to have a read about some of the locals around here, then feel free to do so. We do like to be involved with the community as much as possible. Then later on it was used as a radio repair shop, and most recently it was a blacksmith, until the building was falling into a bit of disrepair and the roof was starting to come in and everything, so the council put the blacksmith out for his own safety. So after that, the council, as this was a historically important building, they put the roof on and petitioned for people to come forward and see what we could do with the place. Now, somebody wanted to make it into a home, but obviously as a business we were bringing in jobs to the area, bringing in tourism, and people were using all of the other local amenities nearby, like some hotels and taxi services and everything like that. So hopefully you can see some images online about what this place looks like. It is really lovely here. So with that, I'll take you through to the still room.
Hi, welcome to the distillery side. Come on through. So this is the distillery side of Stirling Distillery. This is where the magic happens. So I'm Laura. I am the distiller here at Stirling Distillery. So on a normal work day, when I come in, if I'm making gin, I'll run you through the process that I would be doing. So first things first, when you're making gin, you need a base. And so for us, that means ethanol. So here in this big container is 96.6% pure ethanol. So incredibly strong, not something you'd want to drink, but it forms the base of gin. And most gin distilleries will bring in ethanol to make their gin in this way, because what differentiates gin from essentially vodka is taking that ethanol and then adding botanicals to it, the most important being juniper, to then flavor it and turn it into something else. So for us, we take our ethanol and we mix it with water to bring it down to about 50% ABV. So we're wanting it to be at 50% so that you have a nice mixture of water and ethanol before you add your botanicals. If there's too much ethanol, then the botanicals, once you add them in, they just kind of shrivel and you can't get your nice essential oils to actually leach out of them. So I'll bring you over here. We'll talk about our botanicals and our still. So on a regular distilling day, I'd take the ethanol and the water and they would go into our still here. So her name is Flora. It's good luck always to name your stills after a female member of your family. And so here at Stirling Distillery, the still is named after June, one of the owner's mums. So Flora is a 150 liter piece of kit. And so she would do all of the bulk of the work. She's the workhorse here. So the ethanol and the water would go into the pot here, and then we would add in our botanicals. So we have them just kept to the side here. So we use 6 botanicals: juniper, orange peel, angelica root, basil, lemon peel, and then fresh nettles that are actually hand-picked. So those go into the still. And once those are all in, we seal her up through the manhole here and apply heat. And so this is where this kind of contraption at the bottom comes in. So we're applying heat from the bottom. And as I'm sure you've noticed, the still system is made up out of copper. And so there's a few different reasons why copper is the main component of stills. First off, it has really good heat transfer. And so you're going to have to save energy using copper. You're not going to be having to apply a ton of heat to heat the material. You're getting really good transfer of that heat into the stuff on the inside. Second, it's really easy to manipulate the shape of copper, so you can get all of these really interesting designs. And then third, copper acts to actually bind certain chemical compounds, one of the most important being sulfur. So copper will bind to the sulfur and pull it out of your liquid, which will actually make the liquid smoother. It'll taste better because sulfur adds notes like rotten eggs or cabbage, and that's not something you want in your gin. So once we have everything into the pot and we're applying heat, the water ethanol mixture will start to boil, and so that will happen at around 78 degrees. So at 78 degrees, you're starting to get your ethanol evaporating out of the mixture, and it's taking with it the essential oils from your botanicals. And so as that vapor is traveling up the copper pot, it will start to actually expand and then condense back down into liquid. That's why you have a bit of a onion bulb, as it's called, at the top here. It gives the vapor somewhere to expand and lose heat and then drip back down, so it's touching a lot of copper. That process is called reflux. That's something that you're wanting in a distillation process. You're wanting the liquid to continually go through a cycle of evaporating and condensing and running back down the sides of the still. Once it reaches a higher temperature, it'll travel up, 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 and through the line arm there. So once it reaches the line arm, it'll condense because it's losing heat, and it'll come down into this part here. So I'll move that light so you can see it a little bit better. So this pot here is actually a water bath. So we're pumping cold water in through the bottom, and what it's doing is essentially providing an area that's cold. So when the hot vapor comes down and it touches the cold pipes that are running through the water bath here, it condenses even further into a nice room temperature liquid, which we collect out the end. So that is the kind of overview of making your gin. When we're collecting the actual raw spirit at the end, so our raw gin, there's 3 parts that we're going to be collecting. So the first part is going to be the heads. So the heads are the very volatile, the very low boiling point elements, things like acetone that you're not wanting in your gin because it results in it being really harsh in your mouth. So the first bit is pulled off as the heads, and those go to a separate container, not used in gin. The heart of your gin run, that's what you're going to keep. That is the good stuff, that's the gin. The last part is the tails. So that's mostly water with a little bit of ethanol in it. And so you're not wanting to waste ethanol. So instead you take your tails and you put them to the side, and when you do another run, next time you actually add that back in to water down your distillation and recover that ethanol. So ultimately that whole process there will take about a full day, about a full 8-hour shift from adding in the ethanol and botanicals to getting all of your gin. Once you have all your gin, it's probably about 89% alcohol, so not quite at a level to be drank yet. So we collect them into our blending tanks here, as you can see. And at this point, depending what we're making, we'll either add water to bring it down to bottling strength. So for example, Stirling Gin at 43% is going to have more water than the battle strength at 55%. And then for our liqueurs, at that point, we're going to add in, depending on the flavor, extra sugars to make it a liqueur, and then fruits. So on any given day, you can find us quite busy in the distillery, distilling and blending down. And then once we are happy with the quality and strength of our product, we move on to bottling. So that's what we take care of over here. So we have our one-headed bottle filler. And so what we would normally do on a given day is get a bit of a production line going. So filling bottles, corking them, waxing the tops, adding labels. There is a lot of manual work involved with a small distillery producing craft gin, but that's all part of the fun of it, right? Is crafting something with your own hands. And then a fun part of the distillery, which doesn't happen every day, is experimenting. So this here is Linda. So this is a smaller 30-liter kit. And so it has the exact same theory, same design as the larger still, but the still here would be used to create things on a smaller scale, experimental runs, maybe things we're thinking about doing in the future. And so we can produce smaller quantities to taste at that point. So yeah, there's a lot that's always going on here in the distillery.
Thanks very much, Laura. We'll just take you back through now to finish your tastings and you can enjoy your liqueurs.
Moving on from the battle strength, we're going to tell you about our 2 liqueurs now. Again, they're all part of the folklore collection here at Stirling Distillery, and they all tell a story in and around Stirling. The red cap is probably more normal flavour, it's just raspberry. We only use fruit, our own 43% gin, and a little sugar in the liqueur, and all the colour just comes from the pressing of the fruit. And on that means every batch is slightly different in alcohol.
Yeah, it just depends what yield we get from the fruit. So each batch actually has to get sent off to get the alcohol measured. So this current batch is
24%.
24%, and the bramble and mint is 28%. Thank you.
Let me tell you how we came about the name Red Cap. Red Cap was a little boggart character who used to live in the Ochil Hills, which is the stretch of hills that run from the Wallace Monument out to, where is it? Out to Tillicoochary, yeah. And he was a guy who lived in the hills and assisted, there's different stories of it, I prefer this one, guys who assisted gentlemen when their lady friends or their wives or girlfriends were being promiscuous. What you would do, usually on Halloween, you would call upon him to come to your house, and he would come around and you would discuss the problem, and he would put a stone in the broth of the lady, and if she swallowed the stone and improved her behaviour, should we say, between then and the following Halloween, she lived. If not, he would pop back, kill her, and dip his hat in the red blood, and that kept him alive for another year. I mean, I'm not saying all women are promiscuous. I'm just saying some might have been in the times gone by. Anyway, when you smell this, what has been described as is alcoholic jam. As we said, it's only using fruit and the 43%. It is a liqueur, so you can drink it straight. A lot of folk like it in Prosecco, almost like a version of Kia Royale, and it's even been known to go on top of ice cream on occasions, like a raspberry ripple.
Which is delish.
Now we come to our second liqueur, which is our Green Lady. Yes, I know it's not green, as people keep saying, but would you really want a Sturi Maduri? No. Our Green Lady tells the story of the ghost of Stirling Castle, which you won't get when you go to the castle, because they're not allowed to tell you about her. Because they don't want ghost hunters there. But we'll tell you about her. Queen Mary, lady in waiting, had a premonition one night, and she said, I'll sit up beside the Queen and make sure she's fine throughout the night. However, being, how would you put it, conscious of her Queen, she sat with a candle, but she knocked the candle, she set fire to the curtains, the Queen escaped, but the lady in waiting didn't. So hence, she apparently now still roams the castle. And folk at the castle have seen her and say she just wanders round in this green dress. I can't comment, I've never seen her.
She's not been to visit us here at the distillery yet that we know of.
No. So why do we call it the Green Lady? Easy. When you smell it and you taste it, you get the brambles from Scotland and the freshness of the green mint that we put in when we create it. We only use fresh brambles and fresh mint. And
Does anybody remember Pacers? That's what that smell reminds me of. I don't think they make it anymore. That shows
they
their
were in the
age.
70s.
Yeah, shows the age.
So, out of the two liqueurs, I'll be honest, I prefer our Green Lady because it's slightly less sweeter and it's got more depth to it. And it's one you would, again, just drink in your own. Maybe a wee bit soda water if you're wanting to make it a longer drink, or a bramble smash. All these are available in your wee book that you've bought with your pack today.
It also really works really nicely with cheese and biscuits as an alternative to port. Do you fancy that?
Ready? Well, that's the end of the tasting, and I hope everybody's enjoyed it. The world's in a bit of a strange place at the moment, and I know whoever joined us on this tasting got a free bottle of hand sanitizer that we're creating here at the distillery. What we're doing with that is we're giving it away with any purchases online. However, 90% of the stuff we are creating in hand sanitizer is going to frontline emergency services, who we should all be supporting and cheering at this time in a difficult world we live in. Cheers from Stirling Distillery, and look after each other and stay safe.
I really hope you've enjoyed your experience today. We're now going to share some photos of the building before we've done the renovation works, and also as it is today, being pretty much a hand sanitizer production and storage suite. We will return to normal after this crazy period has passed, and we look forward to welcome you into Stirling Distillery. Thank you, and stay safe everyone.